Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I already love today's guest's business because this is an entrepreneur that saw an inefficiency in an entire marketplace and said, you know what? I'm going to fix that. And not only is he going to fix it with a technology solution, but he's going to fix it by thinking about all the different gaps and inefficiencies in that very process. And we are talking today about Wall Street recruiting. We're all going to walk away inspired and full of ideas from today's entrepreneur because this is an innovator and a problem solver. Let me introduce you to him. His name is Bryce Viorst. Bryce is the founder of StreetSmart, and he's a seasoned Wall Street professional with over $3 billion in transaction experience. In just 2.5 years, he's worked on more than 10 high-profile mergers, acquisitions, and capital raises across debt and equity markets, gaining hands-on experience in both private equity and investment banking. Bryce holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Chapman University, where he was recruited to play D3 tennis. You all know, as a tennis player, that gets me so excited about Bryce's story. I'm going to be sure to work in some tennis analogies in today's interview. He also has a master's in finance from Georgetown University. Now he's leveraging his expertise to redefine finance recruiting, helping ambitious professionals, especially those from non-traditional backgrounds, break into the industry's most competitive roles with his company, StreetSmart. And you're going to hear about all the very cool ways that he's doing exactly that. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Bryce Viorst. All right, Bryce, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Awesome. I appreciate you having me on, Brian.
Heck yes. You already know, we talked a little bit off the air. I'm in love with your business, the way you've presented all your solutions, and I want to hear the backstory, though, of how you grew into the entrepreneur that you are today. So who's Bryce? How'd you start getting into all this stuff?
Definitely. So my path to Wall Street and StreetSmart was not exactly traditional. I went to Chapman University for undergrad, which is a great school, but not necessarily a Wall Street feeder. I declared finance my sophomore year as my major, and I decided to start recruiting for investment banking in my junior year, which, for anyone familiar with the investment banking recruiting process, is far too late. Recruiting typically starts in the first semester of sophomore year, and interviews will take place in the second semester. And these are for roles that will begin in the summer between junior year and senior year. So recruiting begins almost a year in advance and sometimes even 2 years in advance. And so I missed the initial window. This is the reason I decided to pursue my master's degree at Georgetown University, which is a great school, a prominent business university, and a direct Wall Street feeder. And so I was able to, in my 2-year program, secure an internship in an investment banking boutique restructuring firm in New York City, and then leverage that to a full-time role at a robust M&A focused middle market investment bank in San Francisco. I spent about 1.5 years working in investment banking, which is actually a lot shorter than the time that I spent recruiting for this role. And within my first 1.5 years, I learned a lot about M&A, the typical investment banking deal process, but I had this desire to get more involved in the tech scene. And so I started on a side project, which was an AI-powered resume builder. This was one of the biggest pain points for me when I was going through the recruiting process myself, is the pure number of applications that I had to submit to even receive one response, let alone get an interview. And there's a statistic that I like to drop, which is for every 10 applications that get submitted, only one of those applications is going to get seen by an actual person. And the reason for this is because 98% of Wall Street firms have implemented ATS technology, application tracking system technology, which is effectively AI that screens out the majority of applications unless you have optimized it in the right way. And so I wanted to create AI to effectively combat AI on the institutional level, AI for consumers to help users that would be looking to recruit for these hyper competitive roles make it past these ATS filters. And so that was the initial idea. I ran the idea by some peers that were software developers, as well as some people that were going through the recruiting process themselves. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. And so I decided to build a small team, create a roadmap, and build the MVP, minimum viable product. And effectively, I had to then make a pretty significant decision to either stay in my high security, low risk, well-paying job with a very lucrative career path ahead of me, or make the very risky jump to start on this endeavor, this side project that did not really have any proof of concept on a tangible level at the time. And so it was a tough decision to make. But I was becoming increasingly passionate about giving back to the people that had gone through a similar process that I went through, and to try to make the recruiting process a little less painful, especially for the people that were coming from non-target schools, with the end goal of democratizing access to these extremely competitive roles. So we spent about 3 months shaping the idea, building the roadmap, and validating the concept. And then we spent about 5 to 6 months in deep product development with a pretty small team. And then we finally launched this past March, about 6 weeks ago. And since then, we've secured 3 institutional partnerships, one of them being my alma mater, Chapman University. All 3 of the institutional partnerships are non-target schools, and we've recently surpassed 500 users, which is a lot more traction than we had initially anticipated. And I think a big thing that resonates with both our users and partners is that the product was built from firsthand experience. It addresses all of the pain points that I had faced when I was going through the recruiting process myself. I deeply understand them, and I deeply resonate with them. And so the end goal is to bridge the gap in information and skills, resources, and timing through a fully comprehensive product that is user-friendly, cost-effective, and really accessible for anyone that's looking at a career in the high finance space, regardless of connections and regardless of university prestige.
Yeah, gosh, I love that overview, Bryce, because there are so many directions we can go in from here, but I'm just going to reveal first and foremost that for me personally, it really revisits all of my college scars, because like yourself, I was a finance major, but I chose economics and finance as a dual major. And so I felt late to the party as well, because by junior year, when I realized I can either go into the economic sphere, and the Federal Reserve is a big employer in Boston, which is where I grew up, or I can go into the finance sphere, it was really tough, because you're right, there are so many inefficiencies to the traditional Wall Street recruiting approach. And I remember when I Googled, like, where's Goldman Sachs? Are they coming to my campus? No, they were down the road at Harvard. They weren't coming to a small business school like where I was at. And so it presented so many challenges for me. And quite frankly, it helped guide and dictate my career path, because it didn't feel like there were opportunities there. And so that's why the second I landed on your website and I saw you've thought about the entire process, you mentioned the resume was the way to start it and leveraging AI, but you have mock interviews, you have all these different tools available. So listeners haven't seen your business the way that I have. I'd love for you to line up what those inefficiencies are and have been in Wall Street recruiting with how you very intentionally and strategically aligned your business.
Yeah, I would love to dive into that. So I think what makes us different is the fact that we are entirely comprehensive. We were built with a user-first design in mind. It was built to be extremely user-friendly, interactive, and entirely comprehensive. So unlike traditional preparation platforms that rely on long, expensive, and stressful boot camps or courses that oftentimes require their own application processes just to get in, we have created something that lays out a very streamlined journey for the user that removes the frictions and allows them to jump in and from start to finish only have one resource that they go to for everything from building their resume to preparing for interviews to finding jobs and then finally landing that offer. So like I said, we like to think about it as a journey. The first step is building a resume with our AI-powered resume builder. And so, as I was saying before, one of the biggest pain points that I faced is the pure number of applications that I had to submit. And the way to combat this with our own consumer-focused AI-powered technology is to create a resume builder that allows for tailoring to specific roles, industries, and job descriptions by keyword optimizing them. And so there's two massive use cases for this. The first is allowing users to tailor resumes efficiently to any job listing. And the second is to pass those ATS filters that the majority of Wall Street firms have implemented. And within this resume builder, we've also included instantaneous scoring as well as actionable feedback, and also gamified it with a leaderboard so users can compete and improve in a fun and social way while comparing their resume scores against peers within the same industry. After building a resume, users can then take that resume and move over to our direct apply feature. So this is, I like to think about it as LinkedIn for high finance. We effectively aggregate finance-specific job listings from LinkedIn, Indeed, and company portals. And then we use AI to tailor those job listings to each user based on role preferences, interests, and their search history. Each job listing will also include custom interview questions so users know what to expect before applying. And then this feature, we call it direct apply, will integrate directly with our job tracker. So when a user goes to apply, they will come back to our platform and we will ask them, did you apply to this role? If they select yes, then all the details from that job listing will sync directly with our job tracker. So job title, company, location, URL will all be automatically inputted into their tracker, allowing the users to remove the unnecessary friction of organizing and keeping all of their applications in one place. And then finally, once the user is able to actually land an interview, we have an interview preparation feature. So we've segmented it into two different areas. The first is interview prep, where users will input their preferences such as industry, coverage group, product group, vertical, role, and they can also upload their resume. And all of these inputs will allow our AI technology to tailor the questions specifically to the user. And from there, the user can then select from a predefined list of categories that are relevant to their selected industry. Each question in this module will include instantaneous feedback, scoring, and also the expert answer. And users will be able to navigate between questions, go back and re-answer a question, and also receive follow-up questions to deepen their preparation. After they've completed the interview prep module, which I like to think about interview prep as doing your homework, they can move over to the mock interview module, which simulates a real interview in a timed, no redo format. So users will then be able to take an interview for anywhere between 15, 30, 45, or 60 minutes. And then they'll receive a comprehensive scoring assessment at the very end of the interview. It's designed to mirror the real pressure and structure of an actual interview. And then similar to the resume builder, they'll receive a score that they can compare against friends and peers with a all-time daily and weekly scoring leaderboard. And our last feature is career insights. So we host a plethora of different relevant insights, such as our Career Path Explorer, which breaks down major roles in high finance, which just gives information to the user, especially designed for the people that are just starting out, that don't necessarily know what a career path in high finance entails. So this will include day-to-day responsibilities, promotional cycles, exit opportunities, backgrounds, work-life balance. We also have a recruiting and networking calendar. So this is a real timeline of recruiting windows as well as networking events. So users will be able to easily navigate upcoming deadlines and upcoming events on their own schedule. We also have market insights. So this will be a analytics dashboard of market information and key economic indicators designed to, in a very user-friendly way, keep them informed with interview-ready insights. And then we also host free resources. So downloadable DCF models, technical preparation guides, and one-pagers for key valuation concepts. And then a new feature that's coming out in the next 6 to 8 weeks is going to be our mobile quiz app. And so this is a gamified quiz experience that is similar to the New York Times model, once a day quiz, 20 questions, 5 minutes, that users will be able to increase their knowledge on the go in a very fun and interactive way. And then similar to the mock interview and resume builder modules, they will be able to compare their scores on a leaderboard format against peers and friends. So the big idea around this is to make the experience a little bit less daunting, a little bit more fun, and reduce the stress and cost and frictions that come with very outdated finance recruiting. And obviously, having gone through the costly boot camps, courses, and burnout myself, I'm very aware of how broken the process currently is. So we are looking to level the playing field, make the recruiting process a little bit more fun, accessible, and more sustainable.
Yeah, Bryce, one of those things that you talked about right there in the way that you've structured your offerings, and I love the way you've laid that out. It's so clear to me that obviously you've gone through this process as a job seeker, and now of course in your role with StreetSmart and what you guys have built behind the scenes. But what really stands out to me is you talk about tailoring it, because the biggest knock that we hear on AI these days is that everyone is sounding the exact same way. And so when we talk about the interview prep, what I really liked hearing from you is I feed it my resume, I feed it the job description of what I'm applying for. It will adjust for that specific scenario. Talk to us about the way that you're utilizing AI as part of the solution so that not everybody has the same resume, so that not everybody's chasing after the exact same role that they find through StreetSmart.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And one of the biggest issues when I was going through the recruiting process myself is memorization. Rote memorization is one of the biggest areas that users will depend on, and they replace real skill building with this memorization. And so having a dynamic experience where every time you prepare for one of these interviews, it's going to be different, is ultimately going to allow users to build real skills while also preparing for the roles that they're going to engage in 1 to 2 years' time. So the way that we've done it is we've allowed for the users to select from a few different input options, such as the industry. So that would be any high finance industry, investment banking, private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, asset management, as well as some other ones. And then from there, depending on the industry selection, they'll also be able to go even deeper. So investment banking, you will generally be placed into a coverage group or a product group. So for investment banking, for example, I worked within FIG, which is the financial institutions group. So I cover banks, depositories. It's effectively investment banks that are advising other banks on mergers and acquisitions, on debt capital raises, and things of that nature. And so one of the biggest issues for me when I was recruiting is all of the prep was very generalized, and there was nothing that was niche or specialized enough to cover all of the different topics that you might be asked in a FIG interview, in a healthcare interview, in a technology interview. And so that was the real reason that I wanted to create this very tailored format to, one, be extremely dynamic, and then two, to also allow specialization for these niche industries where there's really no existing preparation that goes to the granular level that StreetSmart does. And so we're not reinventing the wheel with AI. We don't have a proprietary artificial intelligence model. But what we've done is we've taken the current infrastructure that already exists, and then we've repurposed it into an application and a very valuable use case that does not currently exist. And I think that's the new wave with AI. Initially, the big name players had to build the AI infrastructure, and I think what's coming is a wave of AI-based applications that will really identify all of the different use cases that currently exist in today's society. And so that's ultimately what we've done with StreetSmart, is we identified a gap that existed in the market, and we've taken AI and used it to our advantage to create these very tailored experiences that will allow users to navigate the investment banking recruiting process in a much more streamlined way.
Yeah, spoken like a true entrepreneur, Bryce. And that's why I'm excited to pivot this conversation a little bit and talk less about your subject matter expertise, which obviously you have in abundance with everything that you're building at StreetSmart and your own personal experiences. But I also want to get into the mind of Bryce, the entrepreneur, because we're not sitting here talking about all the problems inside of Wall Street recruiting. We're actually talking about a solution that you're bringing to the marketplace. And you not just saw these problems, but you actively, it's fun to me because obviously sometimes I talk to entrepreneurs that their business is in the process, they're actively building it, and of course you're always going to be building it, but you've actually launched it. You have real life users, and that's my favorite thing about your business is you took massive action to actually solve the problem, not just see the problem. And I like to think it's partially the tennis player in you has contributed to your entrepreneurial thinking. So take us into that mindset, because spotting an opportunity and taking massive action on an opportunity are two different things, and obviously that's what makes you an entrepreneur. So I'd love to hear some insights there.
Absolutely. I never truly saw myself as becoming a founder in the long run, but I do think it stems from my athletic background, being ambitious, at the end of the day, wanting to compete, wanting to win. And everything that came after that was really based on that initial experience being an athlete. Breaking into investment banking, it was very challenging. And while on the desk working on real deals, I was able to gain experience on both large and small transactions, working in both investment banking as well as 1 year where I worked in private equity. And I found the work very intellectually stimulating, high impact, of course, at times very stressful, but ultimately fulfilling. And I was able to take a lot of those skills and transfer them to entrepreneurship, resilience, grit, and a mindset that's really geared towards problem solving, being under pressure, going back to being an athlete. And so what investment banking taught me is not so much the technical skills, but really how to walk into a complex situation, identify an inefficiency, and then create innovative solutions, which all of that is really directly aligned with what I do now. And I think for a lot of people, it's tough going through this recruiting process for sometimes years. I certainly spent years trying to recruit for these extremely competitive roles. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. They spend years in this very tough recruiting environment, and then they're rewarded with an even tougher work schedule. And for me, going from a very tough recruiting environment to a very tough work-life balance, I did, at least at the very beginning, felt a little bit burnt out. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. And so for me, when I was working in investment banking, I wanted to kind of go back to that mindset of problem solving, creating very innovative solutions for sometimes extremely simple problems. And like I said, I had to make this very tough decision between working in a cushy job that's going to give me a very safe career path, or make the jump to starting this endeavor on a much larger mission to democratize access to Wall Street. And of course, it didn't start as that, but I think I knew at the time that it could be much greater than even what I would have been able to conceive of at the onset of starting on this project. So I think, it all came from initially wanting to be competitive, wanting to solve problems under pressure, and then going to investment banking where I was able to gain real life experience doing those things, and then seeing a real problem, and then wanting to create an innovative solution and figuring it out as I go. I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned about being a founder, is that even with the best roadmap in the world, ultimately, everything that you learn is going to be on the go. I think the initial roadmap that I made probably got thrown out on month 2. And I've probably learned more in the past year than I've learned in my other 24 years of life. So I think a big thing about going into something like this is just have an open mind, be flexible, be comfortable being uncomfortable, and just go in looking for problems and wanting to identify innovative solutions to those problems.
Yeah, I love that, Bryce. And I don't know how you're going to top all this when I do get around to asking you what your best piece of advice is. But before we get there, I want to squeeze one more thing in, because oftentimes the biggest knock on tennis players is that they're not team players. It is, of course, a largely individual sport. And what really stands out to me, just hearing your strategic and your executive founder mind speak here today, I love the fact that one of the strategies and tactics you revealed to us is that to get market adoption, you're looking for partnerships, and you've already got partnerships with educational institutions, for example. Talk to us about that approach, because I think it's a very brilliant one. I know how ambitious you are, and you want this to be adopted on a huge scale. You want it to be used all across the United States and the world. How did that approach come to you? What is it in that approach that you look at and you say, this is our path forward when you look at market adoption?
Absolutely. And let me just clarify first and foremost that I did play doubles. So at times, tennis can be a team sport. Going into this endeavor, I think we always wanted to create StreetSmart as something that could be used at the institutional level, not just at the consumer level. And of course, the end product will be used by consumers, but this idea was formulated based on my own experiences at Chapman University. And so one of the first things that I wanted to do was partner with my alma mater. And that's exactly what we did. And from that, we were able to look at the business model and determine that these partnerships at the institutional level will allow for this product to get into the hands of the greatest number of people that would find value in it. So we launched just 6 weeks ago. We've partnered with 3 universities already. We're focusing on non-targets exclusively for the time being, since we think that non-target universities will get the most value. And I personally sympathize with the process coming from a non-target undergraduate university myself. And what we believe is that from this approach, there will be a lot of users at the consumer level that will also find value in it through word of mouth. But we think that partnering with universities and creating these partnerships at the institutional level will allow the product to get into the hands of the most possible people, at least at the onset, and will allow us to establish the credibility and allow us to also gain actionable feedback to continue to iterate and continue to make the product better over time through these kind of official institutional relationships. And that's one of the biggest focuses for us right now is, one, create these partnerships, build relationships, and open up a community to anyone who is going to find value in what we do. And the second thing is just continue to add value, continue to make it better, continue to iterate on the base model, because we're ultimately not going to be finished until we find that really we have opened up this recruiting landscape to everyone that wants to set on this extremely competitive and extremely stressful, complex path. We think that this preparation process, it's really a means to going on this extremely difficult journey. Of course, it's fulfilling in the end, but we don't think that the preparation process itself should necessarily be as stressful as it is. And so we want to remove that part of it through these partnerships with these institutions, allowing it to get into the hands of the greatest number of people possible.
Yeah, I love that, Bryce. And I'm personally a big believer in what it is that you're doing. I think that you're the right entrepreneur starting the right business at the right time in the right industry. And it's really cool getting inside your mind and hearing about those big plans for mass adoption. And I hope and I believe that you guys are going to penetrate the Wall Street recruiting field. And then hopefully one day in the not so distant future, once you've mastered that, then you start expanding into other verticals, because what you've been building is incredible. And the fact that you take that massive massive action. I respect you so much for that part of your story. Not a lot of people go out there and just actively start building things and incredible products like what you've put into the marketplace. So huge kudos to you. And also, I want to ask this last question to that fellow entrepreneur, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, as a fellow entrepreneur yourself, what's that one piece of advice you want to leave them with?
Yeah, it's a good question, and only being on this path for about a year, I'm maybe not the perfect person to ask, but based on my own experiences, I would just say follow a system. Don't rely on luck. It can be extremely convoluted and daunting at the start, and if you get into this cycle of continuously building out roadmaps instead of just jumping into it, you'll never get started. And so I think that was the biggest thing for me, is just taking the leap, just jumping in, and then being comfortable with just figuring out the rest as you go. So I think organizing a plan at the beginning is, of course, the right thing to do and a very smart approach, but you just have to realize that anything you plan for at the beginning will likely get thrown in the trash within those first few months of actually starting on the journey. And so you really just have to go in with an open mind, be a sponge, learn new skills, and be comfortable ultimately with being uncomfortable.
Yes, so well said, Bryce. And you say that maybe you're not the perfect person to give that advice. I would argue the opposite. I would say that you are exactly the perfect person because you're living it. It's the same thing with your business. The reason why you can do such a great job in building these tools is because you lived it. And hearing earlier in our conversation about the fact that 30 days in, your entire plan was out the window, that's the real stuff. So I so appreciate you leaving that advice with our listeners. I will say my biggest regret of podcasting is just that it's not a visual platform. Most people can't see things as we're talking about them. So I'm very excited for listeners to actually go forth and see your website, see these tools in action. So Bryce, for listeners who want to check out all the great things that you're up to with StreetSmart, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
I appreciate that. Yeah, head over to street-smart.io to get the full picture of what we're building. And yeah, I hope you like it.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find that link down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. I'll also, spoiler alert, that we're also dropping in a link to Bryce's personal LinkedIn. So if you work with an educational institution or you know somebody who Bryce should meet, this is what makes this show and our community so beautiful, is that there's so many entrepreneurial connections. So definitely check the links out down below in the show notes. Otherwise, Bryce, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Brian.